This year we're going to continue that conversation as far as 431, and so we're going to cover a bit more of what was released, since that was a thing that, since 431 was not available at last year's UGM. So we're going to talk a bit about what was provided following that release, and then we're going to go into 432 and cover what's available with the latest and most current release. As we can see here, just want to take a moment and thank all the contributors, people on the team, people who um, interns, and people who just contributed code throughout the software's ecosystem. All right. So 431 was released back in October. And this is just, I'm going to spend just one slide on just talking about some of the things that were delivered with that release. The first being 2 new subcommands for the iAdmin command, those being get and set grid configuration. These subcommands just essentially allow you to control options within the rgrid configuration. We've been making strides to move more options out of each server config and into the actual catalog to make it more manageable, because it just makes more sense to have some options to be zone wide, right? Instead of you having to touch every single node. You can add new options. You can adjust existing options. When you upgrade, the iRODS server upgrade process will also just port all of the necessary options for the upgrade for the new version into the catalog for you. So you don't have to go and tweak anything on your own. As far as the new APIs, we delivered 3 of those. These are in blue because they are clickable. They're links. You can click on these and actually go see the API documentation for each of these. The first one is RC Git library features. This is primarily aimed at non-C and C++ clients. So Python, Java, Go, they will now have the ability to query the connected iRODS server to see what features are provided by the library. So if you were to call this, you'd see things such as, oh, does the server support the RC switch user API, or does it support the like other APIs and things, right? We also have RC check auth credentials. This is an API that came out of the development of the HTTP API that we've been working on. It is designed for native authentications, and for native authentication, all it does is allow you to ask the server, given these credentials, would this person be able to log in, right? So this is great for people writing clients acting as iRODS, acting as servers. The last API here is RC Get Resource Info for operation. This is a more powerful version of RC Get Host for put and RC Get Host for get. This essentially allows you to ask an iRODS server to go through the voting mechanism, given some arguments such as maybe you want to perform a write operation, maybe you want to do a read, and so you can take this API, you can make a call to this API and ask the server, given these operations, what resource would that resolve to? And with this, then you can make a direct connection to that resource, to that server, and that should improve performance. This is primarily meant for operations such as reads and writes. Another thing that we did was we introduced options for controlling TCP keep alive. This has been a long time coming, and so this is just going to, instead of people having to touch their kernel configurations and things, they can now just go adjust options within the actual iRODS server itself. We've also removed the size limit on the PAM password, which is great. And we've also made some enhancements to the C++ libraries. Those in particular are the user administration library and the connection pool. For the user administration library, you can now adjust passwords. Again, this was something that came out of work on the HTTP API, so that's great. And then we also added the ability, we extended the connection pools capabilities to allow automatic refreshing of connections. And so if you're using these libraries, you no longer have to worry about refreshing connections yourself. Instead, when the connection pool detects changes within the iRODS server, such as a resource being modified, it will automatically refresh the connection for you. The last thing here of note is we've added a new column to the RS main table, and that what we do now, when you modify a resource, we now track it to millisecond precision. And so this came out of work on the connection pool. And this new column is also available in jQuery 1, so that's great. If you want to know the full release notes on what was provided with 4.3.1, there's a link right at the bottom of the screen. You can click it and read all about it. All right, now for 4.3.2. So this is a slide that we normally have in all of the technology updates. It is available today. We released it just before UGM. Again, the goals remain the same. You know, we want a clean implementation. We want people to be able to read the code and understand what's happening. We want to remove all magic. We don't want to have any implicit decisions being made by the server itself. We want people to be explicit. We want to focus on improving tooling, and we want to focus on data management. That means getting out of the game of authentication and things that people have already solved. Let's see if we go back 2 slides. You may have noticed that the number of issues closed for 4.3.2 is smaller than 4.3.1, and this is kind of a thing that we're striving to do. We want to have smaller releases so that people can wrap their heads around what's actually being changed, and so they don't have to go through hundreds of different issues to figure out, is this safe to upgrade to? All right. For the 4.3.2 user experience, we've made some improvements to multiple I commands. Help text has been improved. You know, things that common things that people ask us in Google groups. We've put effort into documenting that information in the I commands help text. We've improved. So one of the things that we did here with iRSync and iPut, we've correctly they now correctly ignore symlinks. iBun now uses the PAX format when handling archive files. I think this is mostly about removing the size limitations on archive files, so that anyone who ran into that type of issue before, when you upgrade to 4.3.2, that you should no longer have that issue. If you do, please let us know. iAdmin, remove group, and remove user are no longer interchangeable. So if you want to remove a group, you have to, the iRODS 4.3.2 server will now verify whether that entity is indeed a group. Same for remove user. So that's great. And if you do happen to pass the wrong information, it will now trigger an error and let you know. We've also made a small tweak to the setup script, in which now configuration of local storage is now fixed. There was a bug that was reported a while back about that not doing what people thought it should do. And so we made a tweak there and improved that situation. As for core server updates, the items in bold are things that we're going to cover in this talk. Things that aren't bold, I'm just going to briefly just kind of go through those real quick. We added support for MariaDB. And so now anyone who wants to use MariaDB, they know they don't have to fiddle around or work so hard to make that work. The setup script now recognizes MariaDB libraries and things, and so it can operate as if that's MySQL for you. Let's see. Of course, we always focus on improving server stability. So with every release, the hope and goal is to produce a more stable product. Obviously, we want to focus on improving documentation. We've done that by, we now have notices and words about how to report security vulnerability. So if you ever feel you've stumbled upon some form of vulnerability, there's information at docs.irods.org. There's also information at the GitHub repo. And of course, we've updated the dynamic PEP listing. So all the PEP should be listed. If you do happen to find something that's not listed, reach out and let us know. As for replication, we made a tweak so that the good replicas, when you attempt to overwrite an existing good replica with a good replica, this is now considered a no-op instead of an error. And so it shouldn't, unless you are checking for errors when you do a replication, this should be relatively quiet for you. right. And if you want to see all the issues and things that we changed for 432, again, we've provided links at the bottom of the screen. So now we're going to get into the actual items in bold. So for 432 jQuery 2, we've now absorbed the repo into the actual iRODS server. So now when you upgrade to 432, you will have jQuery 2 available to you. It is still experimental, but we do want people to start giving it a try, right? Because this is the only way we can get experience and feedback and figure out where the pain points are and where things are broken and how to go about fixing those, right? So we do want people to start using it. It's the server itself though is not using jQuery 2, and that's because that's mostly because it's just too new, right? People, jQuery 1 mostly works, and so until we build up this experience with jQuery 2, we're going to stay away from replacing jQuery 1 and let the experience build up so that we can produce a stable product. As for clients, Jargon and the PRC, the Python iRODS client, now have support for jQuery 2. PRC was actually, the jQuery 2 support was actually implemented by who is it? I don't want to mispronounce your name. What is it? CS? CT. There we go. So thanks for that contribution. Jargon was also recently upgraded to include jQuery 2 support. These releases, we have not released new versions of these clients with jQuery 2 support just yet, but we hope so very soon. We have a brand new API for iRODS 432. It is RC Replica Truncate. This is essentially an API endpoint that is implemented or modeled on top of the POSIX Truncate API. This was motivated by the NFS RODS project, an attempt to provide, full POSIX presentation capabilities for NFS RODS. This was implemented by Alan King of the iRODS team, so thank you. And with this, we were able to add support for Truncate in NFS RODS, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. Obviously, we also provide microservice, and this deprecates the RC data object Truncate API, which I don't know if anybody used before, but the old API did not follow all the rules of the iRODS. Like, it didn't go through voting, I believe. There were some other limitations there. There's also plans to provide an F-Truncate style API. This is a version of Truncate which works on open file descriptors. And so we haven't confirmed whether that's going to be included in a future release, but there's an issue for people who are interested in reading about it, and if they find it interesting. And at the bottom of the page, we've also included links for the API documentation in case anyone wants to take a look at that. Let's see. We've added more serial. We started with 432. We've also we now serialize more types for the rule engine plugin framework, and specifically IBUN and iRule. So now people who would like or who need to inspect the contents of requests dealing with IBUN related APIs, they can now inspect those requests coming through, and they can make decisions about those. Same for iRule. You can now inspect the rules or at least view the rules and make decisions about it. So that's great. This was implemented by one of our newest developers, Derek. So again, thank you for that. All right. So now we are going to talk about iRODS 5.0 stuff, right? First and foremost, there's no set time frame for when this will be available. Right now, this is in very early stages. We are thinking about a lot of things, but the primary goal for iRODS 5.0 is that we want to modernize the startup and shutdown process of iRODS. And this is to address a few issues such as things related to shared memory, weirdness between fork exec and multi-threaded code. But this will be the first step towards making iRODS more friendly in other environments as well. So some of the ways that we want to address this is that we want to make the startup and shutdown process more deterministic. That means we want to avoid mixing fork and exec and multi-threaded code. We also want to remove dependencies on the Python scripts. Right now, anyone that's deeply familiar with iRODS knows that iRODS startup and shutdown process depends a lot on Python code. And so there's no reason for us to continue doing that. We can move all this code into the actual iRODS binary and make things much simpler. We also want to make it so that iRODS iRODS 5.0, we are planning to make it so that the server configuration is not hot reloaded whenever you make a change to your server config. Instead, reloads would only take effect when you send the appropriate signal, in this case, SIG-hub. That means agents would no longer see new changes unless the admin told the server to reload those settings. And through this new redesign, we also want to give the ability, we want to make non-package installation free. We don't want to have special code paths for non-package install. One last thing that we are considering for 5.0 is how to decouple host names for the server. There is an open issue with some high-level design ideas about how to go about doing that. Another thing that came out of that was also the idea of possibly even removing host names altogether to make things more friendly in cloud environments. No decision has been made about any of this, but it's just something we're thinking about. We have spent some time doing some early experimentation around, this type of thing. All of this is kind of heavily influenced by the HTTP API's design. The plan right now is to honor the following things, such as we want to provide clear separation of concerns between components. We want plugins to be responsible for handling their own shared memory. Note, the main iRODS server process today is responsible for handling shared memory for some of the plugins, in particular the native rule engine plugin. And so there's no real reason for it to do that. We can simplify the startup process by making that responsibility part of the plugin itself. Going back to the fork exec and multi-threaded situation, the way we can get around that is by constraining multi-threaded code to leaf processes. So only agents or just leaf nodes within the process tree are allowed to do multi-threaded code. We want the application to run as a normal application and then give people the option to opt into becoming a daemon process. So that makes things a bit easier for people to deploy in different situations. There's also the idea of maybe having the control plane become an actual process as well. And then also we want this to work gracefully and very well with systemd, because we know people have many requests about wanting iRODS to ship with unit files. Yeah. All right. So now we're going to kind of go into I'm going to have some more people of the development team come up, and they're going to say some words about things that they worked on. On the left here, we have a set of talks, presentations that's going to happen throughout the day and between today and tomorrow. And on the right are the people within the team who are going to come up and say words about various different topics within the iRODS ecosystem. All right, and I guess the first person is going to be me again. Let's see. The first thing is indexing capability plugin. With our latest release, it now requires Elasticsearch 7 or later. It's tested with version 7 and 8. There was a situation with the indexing plugin, which caused many challenges to appear in our attempt to move towards lib standard C++. This was related to Elastic Client and the CPR libraries. And so we've removed those dependencies from the project, and now we just leverage the Boost Beast library. And we actually have that backwards in here. That's weird. So there's no more dependencies. So there's 2 fewer dependencies that we have to think about. There's no change in behavior, it still runs the same. We also, due to a change in Elasticsearch and because they removed mapping types, we also ended up removing the document type rule engine plugin. So now the indexing plugin only ships with two rule engine plugins. Now that's the Elasticsearch backend and also the indexing front end. See, we've improved TLS support for Elastic Client. You can also, it now even supports basic authentication. And of course, as always, we worked on modernizing the CMake build system. For the Python rule engine plugin, this is the big thing here is that now what used to be called global vars is now called iRODS rule vars, and it's now available in all contexts within your Python rule code. So you don't have to, this is like, you can import as many modules as you want, and you will always have access to iRODS rule vars, which is a nice addition. And of course, we focused on improving documentation by doing things such as documenting how do you go about invoking rules across rule engine plugins and getting that information back, writing information back from the Python rule engine, as well as what happens when you call print within your rules. And with that, we're going to have our first team member come up, Derek. He's going to talk about the work he's done on the metadata guard.
This works, right? Okay, hello. So I worked a lot on the metadata guard, which is a plugin that allows admins to restrict users from messing with metadata elements that are in a protected namespace, which is just a fancy way of saying that their attribute name is prefixed with a specific string. Our default example is iRODS : but it can be whatever you want. So the first thing that we fixed is that there is another API endpoint that allows users to mess with metadata, and the metadata guard didn't touch it at all, probably because iMeta didn't use it, but the PRC did, so someone caught that and reported it, and we fixed it. The second thing is that you used to be able to rename a non-protected metadata element into a protected namespace, which technically was kind of a hole because like you shouldn't be able to mess with it at all, but after that the user couldn't mess with it afterwards, so it was like kind of a hole, but patched it up anyways. And finally, we disallowed the use of the deprecated iMeta RMW, which allows you to remove metadata elements by wildcard, and this would just bypass it because you could pass in a wildcard that wasn't actually the protected namespace itself, and then it wouldn't catch it at all. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, so our next team member is going to be Justin James, and he's going to now cover the updates to the S3 resource plugin as well as the Globus connector.
Okay, we've had just a few updates to the S3 resource plugin. First off, libs3 was an external library we used to communicate with S3. That is not maintained anymore. So most of the recent updates to it, we had our own copy of it, and it was in our externals package. And we were making the updates to it ourselves to support new functionality. So it just made sense to absorb that into the iRODS resource plugin for the S3. So we did that work. That just makes development simpler. We also fixed streaming with that should say decoupled mode, not detached mode. So we'll update the slides on that. I was reading that and it doesn't make sense. Server redirect with detached mode. So it is decoupled mode. When you did a server redirect, we weren't getting all the information that we needed to know that we were in decoupled mode. And so we fixed that bug. Also, there were some issues around open flags on put operations, so we fixed that. For the Globus connector, we added some new functionality. We support rename functionality, which wasn't supported previously. We just recently added support for preservation of file modification time. So Globus will tell you want to preserve the file modification time, and they send it to you. So we are now supporting that. It hasn't been released yet, but it will be soon. The OCreate flag is now set on the. We had one edge case where the OCreate flag wasn't set properly. And normally it was set, but there was one edge case when we did a put of a new object through the Globus connector, so that's been fixed. And finally, we didn't have a formal testing framework for Globus, so we've added a Docker-based testing framework, so the testing can be done on automated testing.
Thanks, Justin. Let's see. So now we're going to move on to the Python iRODS client and changes from version 119 to 201. Do we have Dan? Is Dan here?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Dan.
Thank you, Kory. I'm Dan Moore. I'm applications engineer at iRODS Consortium. I've been involved in this work for the last year, that is since the last UGM. We've had 3 releases, the biggest being 2.0.0, which happened earlier this year. So this has involved a good number of fixes of problems, as we'll see in the next slide. Next, please. Yep, addressing problems and shortcomings has involved first and foremost, tickets needed a redesign on the low level. It needed to actually filter applied tickets down to all connection objects that were instantiated for the session. This also fixed the problems that we were having between using tickets with parallel transfer. Also, the setting of none for SSL verify server, that's one of 3 settings it could have, but you'd like all your settings to work, so it had regressed and was no longer functioning as advertised. So we fixed this one, that one too. Also, data objects will behave a little more as you would expect when you open them with using an append flag. First write will occur at the end. New features involve the use of that API we mentioned, get resource info for operations, so that now with a get or a put of a data object, you can go directly to the machine hosting the resource that that hosts the data object or will host the data object, so you don't always have to transfer through the connected server, and it's more efficient. A number of settings that dictate the PRC's behavior can now be loaded and saved, can now also be auto-loaded, in fact, under the control of a environment variable. This can all be found in the README. One of those options also allows the, not enabled by default, but also allows auto-closing any data objects which remain open at the end of a session. Also, we've added the ability to set and remove and query as well quotas for users and groups. And Sietse Snell of Utrecht University contributed this for jQuery 1, the case insensitive query. Also, well, by way of explanation, so managers are actually attributes of a session object that are named, say, permissions or data objects, collections, whatever. It is basically an access point for methods that you can use to manipulate or examine that particular iRODS resource. So in this case, permissions got a replacement and was actually deprecated as permissions, sort of reintroduced as ACLs in release 116 with the new version 2.0.0, which came out earlier this year. That is now officially we have only ACLs, and that's the replacement for permissions, just the name change basically. But it's also a change to the default behavior of that manager, in that now you get basically the same style, more orthogonal listing per ILS with the -A option. So essentially then 201, which came up very recently, is actually more of a compatibility with the latest release for and in point of fact, it is bringing up compatibility to the latest version of the iRODS server, which was also recently released. In addition, you can operate the PRC alongside an environment that's been set up by init with the new 4.3 option of PAM password, which replaces the old PAM key in the environment in the client environment. And that's basically everything.
All right, thank you, Dan. So NFS RIDE. So this part we're going to talk about what's changed since 2.10 up to the most recent release 2.3.0, which was released I think last week. With 2.2.0 we closed 14 issues. With 2.3.0 we closed 6. The major thing here is that the NFS RIDE server is now resilient to restarts of the iRODS server. So if it goes away and then the iRODS server comes back, the NFS RIDE server will gracefully recover. It also, NFS RIDE will now report its name to the iRODS server. And so when an admin runs IPS, they can now see NFS RIDE is connected. Let's see what else. Because of the new API, RC Replica Truncate, as I said earlier, that's provided in this new latest 4.3.2 release. NFS RIDE grew the capability to support truncation of data objects and replicas. And so that means that now very common Linux-like operations such as truncating a file just because of the commands that you run is now fully supported by NFS RIDE, and it's also included. We now have tests around this and that verify its behavior is operating as expected. And of course, we always want to focus on improving stability with the release. One of the things that's ongoing for NFS RIDE is how to improve performance for the list operation, especially when it comes to listing large collections. Right now, it's one of the more difficult problems to solve. Due to limitation, just due to how things work. We have to cross the network, we have to go query the database and get a bunch of information back, handle permissions and all these types of things, right? So we have to come up with a way to do that in an efficient manner. So we're hoping that jQuery 2 can help us here, assuming we can get the pagination logic correct. All right, so just like last year, we talked about some internships that were coming up. This year, we've settled on two things. The first being that we want to convert the zone management tool to use the new HTTP API. It previously used the C++ REST API, which has now been archived. So we're gonna have some interns come in. They're gonna take a swing at trying to update this and see where things kind of fall apart and how we can address those based on a new HTTP API, since this is still very new and experimental. The next thing here is that we want to spend some time and focus on seeing what a thin client library or wrapper around the HTTP would look like in various languages. And so that means all of your favorite language can interact with iRODS via the HTTP API, and you get to avoid all of the hassle of dealing with the iRODS protocol. And so we're going to have interns spend some time investigating various design ideas about what this could look like. Perhaps it's just something that forms requests and then it leaves the response handling up for users, but we're unsure at this time. But this should be an interesting area for interns to investigate, and we'll see what comes out of that. All right, so we are now basically near the end of the talk. As for big picture items for the core, before 3, we're going to continue to work on stabilizing the software, fixing bugs, plugins, clients, all the usual things. For 5.0, you know, this is going to be, we're going to try to leverage this big major version number change by focusing on modernizing the deployment process, improving determinism, and trying to move towards lib standard C++. As for clients, you know, the goal still remains the same. We want to improve situations for clients such as such as zone management tool, metalinks, you know, automated ingest, NFS rides, and the new HTTP and S3 APIs. And of course, we want to continue finding ways to improve the situation for administrators as far as handling policy. That means, you know, building out new components that encapsulate various policy information. Let's see. And yeah, if any of that sounds interesting to you, you know, feel free to tell us about your use cases, your pain points, what you'd like to see, where you struggle. You can do that by just getting involved with the community, right? For anyone that's new here, you know, you can reach us in various different ways. That's through email, through posting to the Google group, opening up issues on the GitHub repos. Just get in contact with us in whatever way you can. We're happy to hear use cases and challenges and solutions and suggestions. And with that is the end of this talk. Thank you. Any questions? We need a mic for John here.
Hi there. For those of us laggards not running 4.3.0 or 4.3.1, what compatibility for things like NFS rods, Python API, and things like that? What's the compatibility matrix? Do you want to say?
So NFS RISE remains backwards compatible back to versions of iRODS earlier than 4.3.1 and 4.3.2. It's just, and as far as the truncation situation, that is specific to 4.3.2, but the NFS RISE code server was designed to gracefully just report an error instead of like just completely crashing on people. So you can still upgrade to NFS RISE 2.3.0 and it should be okay. It's just, you know, you can't leverage the newer features of NFS RISE just yet until you do upgrade. But once you do, things should just work just fine. That's correct.
Hello. You were talking about Elasticsearch. Do you also have experience with OpenSearch or any other varieties that are stemming from that?
We have thought about and discussed OpenSearch. We just have not taken any moments to actually go and investigate whether it's compatible. We feel that it is based on just reading the documentation. It's virtually identical to Elasticsearch. And for what we do, there's no real difference. So I think it's just a matter of anyone here. Oh, okay. So apparently we've heard from one person who maybe has tried out OpenSearch and verified that it works. So yeah, we don't suspect that there should be an issue, but we have to verify. I think there was another question here.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the extensive list of changes in iRODS. I actually have two questions. One is about truncate. Whenever I hear truncate, I think sparse files. And the question is, does iRODS or will it support sparse files?
Sparse files?
Sparse files where you tell the system that I want a file give me a file which is 10 gigabytes in length, but in reality it's 10 bytes.
That will depend on the underlying resource that you're communicating with. If you're dealing with a Unix file system resource that's actually a POSIX system, then it will do the POSIX thing, right? So you can call truncate 10 gigs, right? And if you have 10 gigs of space, and if the OS will allow it, it will do it. But for various other resources, such as, like, for example, S3, right? It may not do that. I think at this moment
that means the client, the input command will have to take into account that I'm uploading a sparse file.
Maybe we take this offline.
Okay, so and the same applies to NFS routes. I mean, if I on an NFS server I create a sparse file, will it actually translate properly back to the server? That's the question that comes into mind. But all right, we'll take it offline. The other question I had was about the Globus connector. I've used Globus Toolkit in the past quite extensively. And is this about the Globus Community Toolkit, or is this about the project that came after that?
Okay. So we have our resident Globus expert, Justin. Do we have a mic for Justin? Okay. Yeah.
As far as I know, it should support both, because one is just a derivation of the other, as far as I know. I'm sorry.
You can talk to Grid.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a couple online also, so I'll just take it while I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. One question is there was a security issue with NFS rods that by knowing the user ID, it can be mounted by another user. Is there any plan to address it, or is it a limitation in the protocol itself? For instance, this might be useful if we want to provide direct NFS access for many users by authentication on local PC server.
I don't really, I feel like I need to have more information about it, but we have a hand here, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a limitation of NFS. So NFS works by whatever UID walks through the looking glass. And so please don't mount NFS rods on a server where someone has sudo, because then they can be anybody and then they're anybody, right? So the protocol doesn't know. They don't verify that. There are ways to set configuration to lock it down a bit more, but that's not on us. That's the protocol. So I think that's the answer. I don't know if there's anything for us to do about that. Happy to be informed otherwise, but I don't think there's anything for us to do about that. Please, right? And then I'll give it back to Justin.
Okay, and Mustafa Dickman has a couple of questions. Currently, the only tool to unlock a locked object is to use iadmin mod REPL command. Is there any thought planned towards developing a new MSI or to add functionality to the PRC in order to unlock objects that are locked?
There have been no plans for doing that. I mean, we're happy to hear ideas, but iadmin mod REPL was designed for, to handle cases where you get into positions or states where you can't recover, right? And so that means if you are getting into these situations, it probably means you need to rethink your approach a little bit, right? Or we have a bug.
Okay, the second question is, if I remember correctly, there was a repo for the iRODS iCommands single binary. I cannot see it anymore. Has that project been abandoned?
Haven't done much with it. Been working on the main repo. Sorry.
Yeah, it's not abandoned, just in the background. Any other questions from anyone? All right. Okay.